Hi there, Robin here. In today's video, I'm going to share everything I know about XLR cables with you. I'm not just somebody who, sells XLR cables and has learned a lot about it. I'm also a big customer of XLR cables. All the equipment that we have in this showroom runs off of, XLR cables. Very important, especially when you have tons of gear that all have to be hooked up at the same time, and all you want to do is push a button to make things work. So we're going to talk about all of this in this video. Now, very important is what I'm sitting on right here. XLR cables, good XLR cables, are actually reasonably priced. Compared to how much money you're going to spend on all your other equipment, this is a reasonably priced product for everything it does for you. So don't feel bad that you spent a couple of bucks. We're not going to talk about tons of money because you got to feel comfortable with what you're buying. But more importantly, what's in this box right here, this is also an XLR cable. And we're going to talk about this too. This is a 300-pound cable. It's an XLR cable. A lot of people use it. Amazingly enough, it's out there all the time. We're going to also talk about what's in this box. All of that is part of this video. Today we're talking about all of this right here, which are XLR cables. Lots of people have talked about XLR cables. All the conversations I've watched online are pretty good conversations about XLR cables. We're going to look at it slightly different. Everybody talks about why they're important, and there's lots of good reasons. Other people test them to see how good they actually are. And what we're going to talk about is how you go about picking an XLR cable. I mean, because you look at it and if you just go by price, you could spend too much money and get a really cheap XLR cable by accident. Or sometimes you can get a really great bargain on a super high-end cable and you might miss it. So today we're going to talk about the differences between the XLRs, which are really the connectors. This is what we're talking about here. And we're going to talk about the actual cable. This is a balanced cable, so it's an audio cable. It's a way to get signal from one end to the other. It's this guy right here. We're going to talk about this, what this is all about, because that's the magic. And we'll also talk a little bit about shielding, but I'm not a super fan on the big conversation because that's why we're getting XLR cables, and I'll explain that in this video. So when we're talking about XLR cables, what we're really talking about are these guys right here, a connector. That's what it's all about. This happens to be from Blastking. It allows you to get an unbalanced signal to your wire, and then from your wire, to the other end of this cable. This is what we're talking about. The better the quality here, the better the quality is going to be regardless of the wire that we have. Wire is going to definitely make a difference in how good it is and how long the runs can be, but this ultimately is your everyday connecting piece. Now, I don't tend to find problems with the male connectors when it comes to longevity. The female connectors, those are the ones that can run into problems. So we're going to open up one here. So here is a good quality female XLR connector. Our 3 pins. What makes this good is what's actually going on in here. The copper is thick enough and wrapped around thick enough so when we plug a male end of the connector into here, we're going to get a nice solid connection, not just today, but every time. I mean, this should be smooth and straight in. We don't want to see play. So now if I, again, put this guy in here, line it up, get it in there, this is not going anywhere. This is very important because the more wiggle room you have here, the more likely you're going to open up these holes inside of here. And that's what we're trying to prevent. So we want to have a nice tight fit here, straight. And we'll see what happens when we put a loose one in. So this is a free cable. It comes in a box with a microphone, and it's the worst part. The microphone's great. The cable is horrible. And why? You've seen these connectors all the time. Don't pay money for this connector. I mean, really, it's not a very good connector, and I'm going to show you why. This cover portion here, when people talk about, a connector breaking inside of something, that's what's happened. Is this sleeve here is just on here, just barely on here. Yes, there's a screw holding it here, but this whole thing can pop off. And when that pops off, it's going to get stuck inside of your microphone or your mixer or anything you've plugged it into. So what you don't want to see happen is when you plug your 2 cables together or you plug it in your mixing board, look at the amount of play on that connector. That connector is just rocking around. Look at the gap opening up there. If I give that a good pull, I will tear this whole thing apart pretty easily. That's a cheap connector. And, I don't even think it should be free in a box. I think they should just stop making this connector because it's, again, this is built to make whoever's selling it a lot of money. In this case, it's basically the manufacturer saying, well, we're gonna throw in a free cable for you, so every customer who buys your microphone, they're gonna find a free cable in the box. And that's too bad, because the first thing I tell people to do with the cable that's in the box is get rid of it, try and buy a new one. You don't have to spend a ton of money, just spend something instead of using the free one in the box. Now, don't get me wrong, there's companies who do put a half decent cable in the box. Sometimes it looks like this. And, you know, again, this would be a good free cable. Not bad when it comes to how well it connects and how little there's actually movement in it, because it does have a rubber ring on it. So we pull that off again. Rubber ring. And we don't have all this little tin going on all around with all these slots, which is really what's making it so weak. They put that there to make sure that it lines up, but it doesn't help at all. Here we have a solid piece of aluminum. Again, very thin though, but solid, and it allows it to line up. Now they use the aluminum instead of metal in that portion, so this way it can squeeze and it'll give a little bit, and it'll make it in there. The nice part is it does connect properly, and that's what really counts. But again, if you're getting this as a free cable, don't throw it out. Hang on to it. It's not going to be bad until, well, you know, one day it's not going to stop working. What you're really going to have is this in your microphone. So here's a PGA-848 great talking microphone, and here's our connector. What's going to happen over time is that it's not the cable that's going to stop working. If you take care of it, the cable will be just fine. What's going to happen is this gets play in it, and the more play this gets, the more likely those pins are going to open up inside the XLR connector. And when that happens, and someone's holding the microphone and they're moving it back and forth, it'll start cutting in and cutting out, or you'll get a scratchy noise out of it. And people have heard that. I mean, that's just horribly brutal. There's nothing wrong with the microphone. What's happened is these connectors have opened up inside of here. And that's what, you know, long term what's going to happen to it. And it's not a question of if, but when. So that's important to know. There's three types of good connectors. There's an original good connector that, you know, some people are like about, and I'll be honest, you know, I'll tell you what the one big problem with this particular connector is. So here it is. This is where you kind of start. These screws are problematic. For a lot of folks over time, especially if you're driving around with a milk crate full of cables, these screws for some reason will get loose, and you can't over tighten them or you will strip something most likely in the actual system. It does give you quick and easy access, and this was the original way of crimping everything down and keeping it solid. This end here though, I think this could have been better, but these tend to be about this good. So eventually this top will break loose because it is screwed down there and it's fastened and clipped into there. So eventually that will go. So this will be your bare minimum. If you have these, use them until either they start making noise, and in which case either keep the cable and get rid of the connectors, or just replace them altogether. But that's where you start. That would be at the bottom end of where you want to spend your money. This should be your most affordable cable you're going to buy. Now, for cables that are made overseas in China, you're going to find this connector here. This black one is probably currently the best connector that's coming out of China when it comes to an overseas brand. It's really good quality connector, and it's as good right now that I think you can find. Now, it is made for both the generic market, so everybody can use this connector, no worries there. Manufacturers, like in this case Blastking, have a choice. They can use the regular connector, which internally quality grade, everything's the same. It's just going to have their name printed on it, which is fine. I think this is a really good cable. We sell lots of them, and this is my go-to cable, and I'll explain to you why this is in a minute. But right now we're just talking about connectors. So here's your connector. That's connector number one. Now it doesn't have to say Blastking, though I would appreciate it if you bought cables that we sold and they said Blastking on it, but I'm sure Blastking would be very happy about that. The other cable that looks similar to it, I still have it in the package. This happens to be Digiflex, which is a Canadian company, and sometimes you get lucky, you might see one of these in the States. But this cable is their Chinese reasonably priced product. So very good, because the brand is very particular about their quality of cables, and this cable happens to be very good. But we're talking about the cable connector right now, so that's this connector here. Both the male and female of these connectors, these are actually labeled and manufactured for Neutrik, which happens to be the brand. They're the brand of brands. If you're going to put a brand on your cable, or if you're making your own cables, that's going to be the brand of connectors you're going to want to buy. You can buy a generic one and there's nothing wrong as long as you know who you're buying from and you've used them before. Like here, if we make our cables, we always use Blastking connectors because we know exactly what we've got and how it works. And if we're replacing a connector, we're going to use the Blastkings. Those are the ones we buy. I'm very, very happy to use those. If you don't have access to that and you're like, well, I got to pick something on Amazon, if neutrik is available, no problem. This is a genuine neutrik because I know this company and I know their standards. They're not going to make a knockoff connector brand choice to put on their actual products. They're going to use neutrik. Now neutrik, when the cable is made in China, they'll always be black connectors and they'll always be of this grade and quality. That being said, when the cable's not made in China and people choose to use neutrik connectors, they are going to go with this connector right here. Now, that being said, a company who makes their cables in North America or anywhere else but China can still choose to use a black connector. I mean, that's choice. So they just want to save themselves a little bit of money. It's like $1 cheaper or $1.50 cheaper to buy one of these versus one of these. But most people usually, as a manufacturing company or a custom company, are going to choose this from neutrik. And the reason why they choose this one is because, well, it's the Rolls-Royce of connectors. Now this happens to be from the same company I was talking about earlier, Digiflex. If you actually go to their website, they now offer custom cables for their customers. So here this happens to have purple and green rings in it. They made this up as a sample for us because we were thinking about having all our cables run in our color scheme for the store. It just kind of made something a little signature, but you can have this any way you want. If you're going to have custom cables made to a specific length, and you're going to have, let's say, 20 cables that are 6 feet long, you might choose all your 6-foot cables to have this color scheme on it. You might choose, a different color for, 10-foot cables or whatever you want to do. But that's the idea. You're going to get this connector. What makes this connector better than your average connector? Again, they've increased the thickness of the copper around the wraps here. They've increased the outer wall, the actual cylinder. Everything's been beefed up in here. Even the way and how tightly it squeezes the actual cable inside, all of that's been beefed up on this connector. Even the thumb trigger has been beefed up. So this way it's a perfect slide, easy off, easy on, and it even spring loads off to the sides. I mean, they've really put all they've got into it. And there's even a rubber washer around the outside this way to stop it from wobbling. And remember when I was saying wobbling is the killer of your microphone cable connection, because eventually this is, you can constantly work this. The rubber acts as a pack seal to it, so this way it's not going to bend on you. So that's what makes a really good cable. Now these aren't more expensive. These are, yes, okay, a cable made in Canada probably, a cable made in North America probably costs 50% or twice the price of a cable made in China. Now for the cable itself is pretty important, but most companies are pretty good at maintaining it. You're going to see mostly, I think, on the majority of the cables you're going out to buy, you're going to see anywhere between 20 and 22 gauge wires for the actual positive and negative on the balanced connection, and then you're going to have a certain amount of shielding on it. So at this point, let's talk about the different size of cable. This is always an issue. People always say, oh, well, this one's beefier than this one. If you're actually using it in studios and at home or anywhere where you're not really going to be, unloading the cable and rewrapping it and setting it up all the time, these cables are great. There's nothing wrong with this. The other one is going to be a chunkier cable. Now you would think that the chunkier cable in this case is stiffer than the thinner cable, but actually it's the opposite. This one here has more flexibility. The tension or the pressure put on the actual cables inside is lighter. If a forklift or something really bad rolled over this, the odds are you're not going to break the cables inside. It would just crush flat as a pancake and still work. I probably still want to replace it because I'm being a little worried about it, or maybe resolder the connector onto a shorter length. But the odds are this cable will take a much bigger hit when it comes to abuse. And over time, it just better wear and tear. Again, the actual spring load, how much tension we can put in this cable, twisting it, it's very relaxed cable. This one is a little stiffer in that sense because the actual outer rubber is tighter around the actual inner case wires. Internally, the wires tend to be consistent. Some manufacturers will have a braided casing over this. Some manufacturers will do a wrap. I think for the fact that it's running as a neutral wire all the time when it's running in balance mode, I think this is probably the more appropriate way to get it done. Again, though, it does give for maximum flexibility because we're not trying to achieve 100% shielding here. We're trying to minimize the amount of RF going through the system. So the table's starting to get pretty cleared off here. We just have 3 more packs, and this is to show you the variety of things you can get when you're buying an XLR cable. You can buy it in a snake, which is what's going on here and here. This happens to be a straight XLR male to female 8-pack. When we look at an actual snake, we notice that these cables are always just the cables themselves encased in a smaller rubber plastic casing on it. We're just protecting the individual cables at this point. We're not worried about people walking on it. This allows all 8 of these cables, 8 to 8, male to female, to be packaged in here. One cable brings all 8 XLRs from end to end, and you're going to get the performance, and the biggest part is much better value. When you invest in a snake, in this case this happens to be 25 feet, this is literally half the price usually of 8 individual 25-foot cables. The important thing is sound quality is going to be the same. Convenience is you're going to unroll this. Now, most people are not going to, they're still going to need a bunch of short cables on stage, of course, to make all this happen. But it certainly beats having to run 8 individual cables, which would probably be a variation of lengths anywhere between 30 to 50 feet to replace this one part of your cable. So you can either run 8 of these guys individually, which unless you label all your cables, you're going to have to figure out what you got, or you use an actual snake package like this, and it's going to be pre-marketed with all the different colors on it. So the first one we've looked at happens to be a straight line XLR. So they're all male at one end, they're all female at the other end. So you can also buy your snake extension packages like this, which happens to be at one end a combination of all your XLRs. So this probably is going to go into your mixing board. And in this case, this happens to be 8 female, 4 male. So if this was on our stage, I would be able to plug in up to 8 microphones or any combination of equipment into this particular package. And then on the bottom end, we'd have all the signals coming back to the stage. So maybe we have 2 stage monitors and our 2 main speakers hooked up here. These guys go the extra distance. All the actual returning signals, so everything going back to the mixing board, those are all your mic channels, let's say, or line channels. Those are all numbered, 1 through 8 in this case. And the actual signals that are going from the actual mixing board back to the stage, so again, your monitors and that, they're run through A, B, C, D in this case. They use the alphabet to actually make it happen. So to make sure that your cables don't get all snagged up, Blastking in this particular case happens to give you this right here, which is basically, you know, it's a flower with a bunch of holes in it, and it keeps your actual harness from getting all tangled up. So you're not trying to unweave everything. If you keep it properly, it'll always stay all untangled and easier to manage. I mean, that's just a cool little trick they put on there. Now there's one more cable we happen to have on the table today, and that's this one right here. This is great for DJs. If you're, or anybody who's doing main PA setups, where you're just hooking up some speakers and you need to get your power from the speakers back to the board or to wherever you're going to. This happens to combine both a power cord and your XLR cable into one package. So this one, you only drop one cable. It's very clean. It's very convenient. You don't have to have an extension cord or anything like that. This is going to do all of that for you. And at the other end, of course, you have your plug-in XLR. So all I need, if I'm going to use this on a controller, get a 6-foot XLR cable so I can plug this in. On the back of your speaker, you're just going to plug these 2 guys in right there. This is really a clean way to go. And again, because they're balanced cables, I'm not worried about noise transfer between the power cord and the XLR cable. That's all going to get canceled out. So let me give a shot at trying to explain what a balanced signal is, because that's the most important thing. Once you understand a balanced signal, you'll understand why XLR cables can be packaged in all these different ways, shapes, and forms. For the best way for me to show you how it is, I'm going to use my hand as a reference. This is the signal. This is what's going to go through the pipe. This is going to go down the wire, come out on the mixing board. How do we stop this from getting any interference? So what we'll do is we need to make a mirror copy. This is why there's 3 pins on an XLR connector and why we have 2 main wires going down an XLR cable. We need to take this signal and we're going to create a mirror image of it. So before we send it out, we're going to flip it upside down. So in this case, this is going to be my mirror image. Take the signal, make a mirror image of it. So now we have 2 of them and they're opposite. They're both going down the wire at the same time, but this one is opposite from this one. If anything hits it on the right side, it'll hit it on the right side on both. So in this case, that's my thumb on this side, and on this case, it's going to be my pinky. So if we get a strike on the same side, so we're going to say that the right side is a positive strike, the left side is a negative strike. So it's going to happen the same on both wires. So if I get a positive strike, that's going to be on the side of my thumb here. That, let's say, is at 12 kilohertz. 12 kilohertz positive, strike right through the wire on this side. Same thing's going to happen here. Whoosh, I'm going to get a 12 kilohertz strike on this side of the wire at exactly the same place. It's happening at the same place, same time. This is the actual music here, opposite, regular. When it gets to the other end, and we can have strikes all the way down, by the way. It could be on the positive side, it could be on the negative side. It'll always strike both wires. When we get to the other end, what we're going to do is we're going to put it through an analog processor, which is going to put that signal back together again. When it does that, notice this is my right side, this is my right side. Thumb on this side, pinky on this side. When I bring that together, the actual signals have gone apart away from each other. So that 12 kilohertz signal, which was originally positive and positive, because I flipped this upside down again, it turned into a negative. And when it merged, I ended up with a negative 1200 and a positive 1200. Those two signals cancel themselves out to a big fat zero. And that's about as easy as I can explain it. It's more important to understand that I kind of get the gist of what it is and why all this is actually working. You can feel confident that buying a balanced cable, an XLR cable, is going to do all the magic it needs to do. Because at the end of the day, that's all it is. It's a great analog system that just works. It's not filtering anything out. It's not gonna chop out any of your music. It's literally just going to get rid of interference. Now, of course, there's always a certain amount of background noise because depending on the purity of the cable, and that's always hard to tell, there's always going to be some residual. Or if you have too much shielding sometimes, you can end up with a bouncing signal inside, which is going to lay down a little bit of background noise. If it's constant and it seems that it's picked up at the beginning and it creates a wave in the cable, that too can stay. But what we're really doing is getting rid of the general noise, the big heavy noise that normally would pollute a cable, creating buzzing and humming sounds, things you don't want at really high volume levels. All that, all of it, gone, not to worry about. So here we are, back of the box. Again, 300 pounds. That's why this guy comes with wheels on it. And it is an XLR cable. It's a hybrid XLR cable because they've also added network cables. Now, what is it? Well, it's a snake. We've covered snakes already, but this is very impressive. This has a big door that opens up on one side here. This is where we're going to get to connect all of our equipment to. So this is it. It's a full rolling rig, 150 feet in this particular case, and it also features 12 inputs and 8 outputs. So this way we can either have this at the stage or we can have this at our actual recording studio. It's going to decide on where we want our XLR cables to be. In this case, if I wanted to have a full stage setup with 12 actual microphones or a combination of instruments and microphones, I would have this right next to the stage or on the back of the stage. It's going to allow me to pull out the actual cable and then connect everything to it. When you've actually connected everything to this, so I've got all my XLRs running in here, I can then close the door and not worry about it. Why? Because when we turn this guy to its side, when we go here, we have another door. And there we go. We've got a tray that holds our connection. This is everything that we're going to be putting on our mixer. So in this bag is all the actual XLR connections for our mixer. So if we do that, we can pull this, take that out of there. And then we basically would pull this out of the actual box. Now the amazing part is that because this is so heavy and the cable is huge, I mean monstrous, I'm not going to pull this whole cable out of the box. I'm going to set this up right on the floor, let's say next to the actual mixer, and then on the flat part of the floor, I'm going to just start pushing this down the entire length of, let's say, the church or the hall or wherever I need to go. And when I get to the other end, guess what? I'm going to have this all unrolled. That's probably, and then by the way, it's a lot easier once you've taken all the cable out of it to get it on the stage, because you've left, let's say, 150 pounds of cable or 250 pounds of cable on the floor, and all you have to deal with is picking up what's left. So a lot easier to handle. So definitely you want to just push it down, and as you're going, pull that cable out, and you'll be all set with that. That's what's going on here. That's why it's on wheels. That's why it's in a case. Look at the size of this thing. It's a behemoth. I mean, you'd have to lay, like this thing all together has 20 cables, 20 XLR cables right here. Plus, because so many speakers require a network connection on them now, or maybe you have other switching control boxes that you need to connect for wireless systems or for just network connections, all of that is done here too as well. They give you a whole separate package just for that. So that's awesome. So again, if you have speakers that have a controller for them, so this way you can adjust and set that all up on your computer, but you require a network cable to make that happen, this is going to do it for you. And this, by the way, will run any type of connection. So if I did have to put a router up there or a router in the back for some other connections, you can still use these cables to make that full connection back and forth. I really like the little extra trim. They didn't just go with a heat shrink. There's so many cables here that they actually have a proper steel metal casing here that allows for a proper transfer without pulling on anything. All their cables happen to have individual cable protection on it. So it has each one, besides being that rubber finish inside, externally it has a braided finish on it as well. All the cables are labeled letters and numbers again, for depending on if it's going to be used as a send or a return signal, that sort of thing. It's all taken care of for you. And that's it. That's what happens when you buy really good cable and you get the right cable for the right job. Is it cheap? Absolutely not. These things are absolutely worth what you pay for them. It is a bargain though when you consider everything that you get in one package. The transport case, all the cabling, everything's pre-done and labeled for you. The length of the whole cable, to take that into consideration as well. All of that makes these much more economical than just buying cables after and after and after. Every time you need more cable, you buy more cables. If you invest in a harness like this because you need a harness, this is going to save you a lot of time and a lot of grief. And it can make this happen. By the way, this is just as good as buying individual cables. One of these cables sounds just as good as having all of these cables. Again, that's the whole secret behind having a balanced system. It's going to allow you to get away with all of this without adding any problems to your actual system. When you're done with your equipment, you just basically open up the door, make sure you have nothing connected anymore, and just start winding it all back up again. And there you go. It's as simple as that. You're going to put this back away. We're going to put this back into the bag. Put all your cables back in the pouch. Just protect the ends so this way no damage during shipping. We're going to throw that back in here. We're going to take the network connection. Grab the Velcro strap. Put our network box right back where it came from in the nice little holder. Make sure we pick up the slack. And there we go. We put that all away. A couple of extra little points on it. On the back side, there is a wheel that allows you to lock the actual roller inside so it doesn't, unroll itself. And when you are hooking up XLR cables to it on the stage, you don't leave this door open. You don't just run your cables through this door and leave them open here this way. We're not going to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to have this door open instead. And this is only when you get to the stage. So once you're on the stage, to keep everything nice and clean, you take your cables, pass them through this door, plug yourself in to where you want, and before the show starts, make sure you close that door, and all your cables will be coming out the actual smaller side door panel. Just keeps everything clean, gives you a nice look to the system. This is what everybody will see if it's on stage in the back corner. All the cables will come out of the side of the unit, just like that. Much cleaner way to have your stage setup, just like that. And this is, of course, this will be the cable that we plug into our microphone. Job's done. And that's your hybrid snake package. Now this is, again, this is from Blastking. This is available from us. And it's available, of course, if you're in the US from Blastking. So we'll have links to this, plus all the other products that we've featured in today's video. Find them down below. That's what supports this channel. Remember to hit the thumbs up button. I really appreciate it. So does YouTube for some particular reason. That's how they do their matrix and measuring of all these things. If you haven't subscribed, please do. I'm sure there's a you know, palm tree sitting on the screen at this point. And we also have our other channel where we would just review the products. We don't get into all the details, but we do review and show how the overall features of the product are. So at this point, I'd like to say thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video, and bye for now. This looks like a lot of fun. Oh.